In 1934, a single jackrabbit could mean the difference between supper and an empty table for a starving Oklahoma family. When the banks failed, the rain stopped, and the topsoil rose in black clouds that swallowed the sun, families across the southern plains were left with almost nothing. No money, no crops, sometimes no food for days. So they made do with wire, wood, rubber, and rusted steel. Number 9 on this list could butcher a hog or clear a fence row of rattlers with a single stroke. And number 3 was so common that whole towns gathered around it on Sunday afternoons. These are the 25 poor man weapons Dust Bowl families turned to when they had nothing left but grit and hunger. Before we start, hit that subscribe button. Let's count them down, beginning with number 25. Number 25. The cane pole was the cheapest way to put protein on a Dust Bowl table, and nearly every farm kid owned one. Cut from a stand of river cane or bought for a nickel at the feed store, it was nothing but a long tapering stalk with a length of cotton line, a cork float, and a bent pin or a penny hook tied to the end. Boys walked barefoot to the muddy creeks and stock tanks that still held water, digging worms from the shade of the barn on the way. A stringer of catfish or sunfish could feed a family of 6 when the smokehouse stood empty. It asked for no gunpowder and no cartridges, only patience and a willing creek. In a decade when a box of shells cost money nobody had, the humble cane pole fed more mouths than any rifle. Number 24. When one pole wasn't enough, families set trot lines and bank lines to fish while they slept. A trot line was a heavy cord stretched across a creek, weighted at both ends, with dozens of baited drop hooks hanging at intervals. Bank lines were simpler still, a single line tied to a willow branch bent over the water, set at dusk, and checked at dawn. Baited with liver, crawdads, or balls of stink bait mixed from soured dough, they worked the river through the night while the family rested. Come morning, a father could walk the bank and pull in enough channel cat to fry for 2 days. It was hunting without standing guard, food gathered by patience and current. For men who worked dawn to dark, chasing any wage they could find, the lines did the fishing. They had no time to do themselves. Number 23. A minnow seine turned a shallow creek into a grocery store. 2 people waded in holding the ends of a weighted net, often nothing more than a flour sack or a stretch of window screen tacked to 2 broom handles, and dragged it upstream through the pools. Minnows, small perch, crawdads, even frogs piled into the mesh with every pass. Nothing was too small to eat when the cupboards were bare. Children shrieked and slipped on the mossy rocks, while grandmothers sorted the catch on the bank, tossing back only what was truly worthless. A good drag through a spring-fed hole could yield a bucketful in an afternoon. Fried whole in a skillet slicked with bacon grease, the tiny fish became a meal. The seine caught what hooks missed, sweeping the water clean of anything that swam. Number 22. After dark, the gig came out. A gig was a long cane or hickory pole tipped with a barbed metal fork, and in the hands of a steady man, it meant frog legs and fish for the pan. By lantern or by moon, families waded the shallows of ponds and sloughs, freezing bullfrogs in the light before driving the fork home. The same tool speared carp and suckers that lay in the warm shallows on summer nights. Frog gigging was a social thing too. Neighbors went out together, sharing one lantern and splitting the catch. A gunny sack heavy with frogs meant a rare feast of sweet white meat that cost nothing but a night's sleep. When ammunition was worth its weight in gold, the silent gig let a family hunt all night without spending a single shell. Number 21. The spade was a digging tool by day and a guardian by night. Every homestead had one leaning by the door, its blade worn thin and bright from breaking the hard-baked earth. A worn spade could be filed to an edge that split a snake in half or turned a stray dog from the chicken coop. Rattlesnakes drawn to the cool of the porch met the flat of the blade. Some men kept an old spade sharpened just for the fence rows, where copperheads hid in the drifted dust. It was never meant for fighting, but on a lonely farm miles from any neighbor, a long-handled blade within reach gave a family peace of mind. In hard times, the same steel that turned the soil also guarded the door, a tool and a shield in one blistered pair of hands. Number 20. The garden hoe fed the family and, when needed, defended it. A chopping hoe with a freshly filed edge did more than cut weeds from the bean rows. It dispatched snakes, killed rats in the corn crib, and settled disputes with any predator that came for the henhouse. Women who spent long hours alone while men rode the rails looking for work kept a hoe close in the field and the yard. It was light enough to swing quickly and long enough to keep danger at arm's length. In the endless war against the jackrabbits that stripped the gardens bare, the hoe was often the first thing a wife grabbed. Cheap, common, and always within reach, it was the most ordinary tool on the place and one of the most trusted when trouble came up the lane. Number 19. The scythe was built to cut wheat, but its long curved blade made it fearsome in a pinch. Swung by a strong man, it cleared brush, felled tall weeds, and could hold off anything that came too close. During the grasshopper and jackrabbit plagues that darkened plain skies, farmers used scythes and cradles to beat back the swarms, threatening what little grew. The blade required constant sharpening with a whetstone, carried in a water-filled sheath on the hip, and a dull scythe was worthless. Most families owned one because hiring a harvester cost money that had simply vanished. Come cutting time, whole families worked the rows by hand from first light, the rhythmic hiss of the blade the only sound for miles. It was back-breaking, ancient work, the tool of a people thrown back 100 years by drought and dust. Number 18. The walking stick was the quietest weapon a poor man carried, and the least likely to draw notice. A stout length of hickory or Osage orange, cut and cured hard as iron, served an old man as a cane and a young man as a club. Drifters and hobos crisscrossed the dust bowl by the thousands, riding the rails and walking the roads, and a farmer heading to town on foot liked to have something solid in his grip. A good stick asked no questions and needed no license. Weighted at the head with a knot of burl, it could turn a stray dog or warn off a stranger without a word spoken. Boys carried them to knock down persimmons and rabbits alike. It was the humblest kind of protection, a piece of a tree shaped by a pocket knife that a man never had to explain. Number 17. The blackjack was a city cousin of the country club, and it followed desperate men out onto the road. Little more than a sock or a leather pouch filled with sent buckshot or a smooth river stone, it fit in a coat pocket and carried a punch far beyond its size. In the crowded hobo camps and rail yards where jobless men gathered, a sap meant a measure of safety among strangers. Some were sewn from old boot leather, others were nothing but a bar of soap knotted into a sock. It was a weapon born of having nothing, cheap, hidden, and quiet. Nobody was proud of carrying one, but on the migrant trail, where thousands drifted west with everything they owned strapped to a Model T, a man learned to protect what little he had left, however he could. Number 16. Long before rifles, people knocked down small game with a heavy stick thrown flat and hard, and Dust Bowl children rediscovered the trick out of hunger. A rabbit stick was any dense, slightly curved length of wood, mesquite, oak, or an old axe handle that spun end over end when hurled. Boys practiced for hours in the yard until they could bring down a cottontail flushed from a brush pile or drop a bird off a fence wire. It cost nothing, made no sound, and needed no ammunition a family couldn't afford. A skilled thrower could feed himself where a rifleman would have gone home empty for lack of shells. Passed from older brother to younger, the rabbit stick taught a whole generation of farm kids to hunt with the oldest weapon there is, a stick and a good arm. Number 15. Borrowed from the vaqueros of the Southwest, the bola was a cord weighted at each end with stones or lead, whirled overhead, and thrown to tangle the legs of running game. In the ranch country of the Texas Panhandle and New Mexico, where Mexican and Anglo families lived side by side, the bola brought down jackrabbits and even wild turkeys without wasting a shot. The weights were often nothing but smooth creek stones sewn into rawhide, tied to a length of braided cotton. It took practice to throw well. A poorly aimed bola tangled the thrower as often as the prey, but a good one could drop an animal at 30 feet in dead silence. For families who counted every cartridge, a weapon that could be thrown, recovered, and thrown again was worth learning. The bola caught what the eye could see and the arm could reach. Number 14. The rabbit gum was a simple box trap that caught supper while the family slept. Built from scrap lumber or a hollow gum log, which gave it its name, it had a sliding door held up by a baited trigger stick. A rabbit, squirrel, or possum nosing after a bit of corn or apple would trip the stick and drop the door behind it, held safe until morning. Farm boys ran a line of gums along the brushy fence rows, checking them at dawn before school. Each catch was fresh meat that cost not a single shell, and the animal stayed fresh until it was needed. Cheap to build and endlessly reusable, the rabbit gum was a quiet, patient hunter that worked the night shift for free, asking nothing but a handful of bait and a place along a well-worn trail. Number 13. The deadfall was as old as humankind and cost absolutely nothing but time. A heavy flat rock or a weighted slab of wood was propped up on a delicately balanced figure-4 trigger, baited underneath. When an animal disturbed the bait, the whole weight came down. Dust bowl trappers set them for rabbits, quail, ground squirrels, and pack rats along the trails where sign was thickest. The figure-4 was a small marvel of whittled engineering, 3 notched sticks that held all that weight on a hair trigger until the moment of the strike. A boy who learned to carve one had a hunting tool he could rebuild anywhere from any 3 sticks and a rock. It took no metal, no store-bought parts, and no ammunition. When a family had nothing at all, the deadfall proved that patience and a sharp pocket knife could still put meat on the table. Number 12. The bullwhip was a working tool that doubled as a weapon on the open range. Braided from strips of rawhide or leather, it cracked with a sound like a rifle shot as its tip broke the sound barrier. Cowhands and farmers used it to move stubborn stock, but a man skilled with a whip could also flick a rattlesnake off the path, turn a charging hog, or drive off a threatening dog without ever touching it. On isolated homesteads, the crack alone was often enough to scatter trouble. A good whip took years to master and demanded respect in careless hands, which is why fathers kept the long ones out of reach. But coiled on a nail by the barn door, it was one more thing a family owned that could speak loudly when words wouldn't do. Cheap leather, braided by lantern light, turned into a tool with real teeth. Number 11. The axe split the firewood that kept a family from freezing, but it never stopped being a weapon. Every homestead had at least one, and a hatchet small enough to swing with one hand hung in nearly every kitchen and rode in every wagon. It butchered hogs, killed chickens, cleared brush, and, in the worst moments, stood between a family and whatever came out of the dark. On the migrant roads west, a hatchet was among the first things loaded onto the truck. Too useful to leave, too valuable to sell. It chopped kindling at the roadside camps and drove tent stakes into hard ground. A man alone on a dark highway felt better with one under the seat. Of all the tools that crossed the plains in those years, the axe was the one no family could do without, whether the task was survival or defense. Number 10. The pitchfork was the icon of the desperate farmer, and for good reason. Long-handled and tipped with 2 or 3 needle-sharp tines, it pitched hay and manure by day and guarded the barnyard by night. It kept coyotes off the calves, held drifters at the gate, and gave a lone woman a formidable reach against anything that threatened her children. Everyone knew what a pitchfork could do, which was often enough to end a confrontation before it began. It hung on the barn wall within easy grab, familiar to every farmhand. During the great jackrabbit drives, men used forks and clubs alike to thin the swarms that were eating families out of house and home. Ordinary, unremarkable, and present on every farm in the country, the pitchfork became a symbol of people who had lost everything but refused to be pushed off their land. Number 9. The corn knife was a long, heavy blade built to chop corn stalks, and it could butcher a hog or clear a fence row of rattlers with equal ease. Cheaper and more common than a proper machete, it was a fixture in the fields of the Corn Belt and the plains alike. Farmhands swung it all day, cutting stalks and clearing cane, and it hung by the door the rest of the time. When snakes crowded the shade near the house in the killing heat, the corn knife ended the argument in a single stroke. Its long reach and keen edge made it one of the most genuinely dangerous tools on any farm, respected by everyone who handled it. For a family with no money for specialized gear, the corn knife did a dozen jobs: harvesting, butchering, clearing, and, when it came to it, defending the home ground. Number 8. When a family couldn't afford a good knife, they made one from an old file. A worn flat file was heated in the forge or the kitchen stove, hammered into shape, ground to an edge on a foot-pedaled wheel, and fitted with a handle whittled from a scrap of hardwood or wrapped in twine. The hard steel of a file held an edge like nothing else, and a homemade file knife often outlasted anything sold at the hardware store. Men carried them for skinning game, cutting rope, butchering, and every daily task a blade could serve. On the trap line, it dressed out rabbits and coyotes. In the kitchen, it did the fine work. It cost nothing but the labor and a discarded tool nobody wanted. In a decade when even a pocket knife was a luxury, the file knife proved that a resourceful man with a fire could arm his own hand. Number 7. With cartridges beyond reach, some families went all the way back to the bough. A stave of Osage orange, the same wood plains tribes had prized for centuries, and which grew thick along plains fence rows, was shaped, cured, and strung with twisted cord or a length of harness leather. Arrows were fletched with chicken feathers and tipped with sharpened nails or filed metal. It took real skill and endless practice, but a bow was silent, and its arrows could be pulled from the ground and used again. Boys hunted rabbits and squirrels with them along the creek bottoms, saving the family's precious shells for larger game or trouble. It was slow, difficult, and unglamorous, but a bow never ran out of ammunition a family couldn't buy. When the modern world had priced them out, some simply reached for the oldest weapon on the plains. Number 6. For many families, steel traps weren't just about food. They were about cash money, which was rarer than rain. A line of leg-hold traps set along creek banks and game trails caught coyote, fox, muskrat, skunk, and possum, whose pelts could be sold or bartered for a few precious dollars. A boy who ran a good trap line before school could earn more in a hard winter than his father made in wages when there were any wages at all. The traps themselves were an investment, often bought second-hand or handed down, and were guarded like tools of a trade. Every morning meant a cold walk along the line to reset sprung traps and gather the catch. Fur money bought shells, salt, coffee, and shoes. In a broke and barren decade, the humble steel trap was one of the only ways a poor family turned the empty land into hard currency. Number 5. It started as a child's toy and became a serious source of food. A slingshot was a forked branch of dogwood or oak cut to fit the hand, fitted with 2 strips of rubber cut from an old inner tube, and joined by a leather pouch salvaged from a worn-out shoe tongue. Loaded with a smooth creek pebble or a ball bearing, it could take a bird, a squirrel, or a rabbit at close range without making a sound or spending a cent. Every farm boy carried one in his back pocket, and the best shots could bring home a string of sparrows and doves for a pot pie. It cost nothing but a bit of scrap rubber and an afternoon's whittling. Silent, endlessly reusable, and deadly accurate in a practiced hand, the slingshot fed more Dust Bowl children than anyone would ever guess from something meant to be a toy. Number 4. A coil of wire was one of the most effective survival tools a poor family owned. A snare was nothing but a loop of thin, strong wire, pulled from a fence, a baling roll, or a broken piece of farm machinery set in the run where rabbits pushed through the brush. As the animal moved forward, the loop drew tight, and the family had fresh meat in the morning with no shot fired and no bait wasted. A boy could set a dozen snares along the fence rows in an evening and check them at dawn. They cost nothing, made no noise, and worked while everyone slept. Rabbit became the great staple of the Dust Bowl table, fried, stewed, and made into pie so often that some called it Hoover hog. Behind countless of those meals was a simple twist of wire, patient in the dark. Number 3. When jackrabbits swarmed the plains by the millions, eating the last green thing standing, whole communities fought back with nothing but clubs. The great rabbit drives of the Dust Bowl were part pest control, part social gathering, and part act of desperation. Hundreds of men, women, and children spread across the fields on a Sunday afternoon, forming a vast line that drove the rabbits toward a fenced pen. There, with clubs and bats and lengths of pipe, they thinned the herds that were destroying what little the drought had spared. Thousands of rabbits might be taken in a single drive. It was grim, exhausting work, and not everyone had the stomach for it. But the meat fed families and the drives saved crops. Newspapers of the era recorded drives that ran to tens of thousands. Out of catastrophe, communities found a hard unity, armed with nothing more than what they could swing. Number 2. The single-barrel shotgun was the workhorse of the poor man's hunt. Cheap, simple, and nearly unbreakable, a break-action 12 or 20 gauge, or the light, thrifty 410, could be had second-hand for a few dollars and passed down for generations. It put quail, dove, duck, and rabbit on the table and guarded the henhouse against foxes and hawks. One shell, one bird, and the family ate. Because shotgun shells could be reloaded at home with a hand press, powder, and shot, a careful man stretched a single box of hulls across a whole season. The scattergun forgave a shaky aim in a way a rifle never would, which made it the meat gun for families who couldn't waste a shot. Standing behind the kitchen door in nearly every farmhouse on the plains, the single-barrel shotgun was the most trusted friend a hungry family had. Number 1. And finally, at the very top stands the single-shot .22, the true poor man's rifle, and the most important weapon on the Dust Bowl farm. It cost only a few dollars, new and far less used, and a box of 22 shells was among the cheapest ammunition ever made, small enough to carry 100 rounds in a shirt pocket. Accurate, quiet, and sparing of powder, it took rabbits, squirrels, quail, and the occasional coyote at the edge of the yard, feeding families day after day for pennies a meal. Fathers taught sons to make every single shot count, because a missed rabbit was a wasted cent nobody could spare. That little rifle hung on pegs above the door in a million farmhouses, ready at a moment's notice. More than any other tool, it stood between the Dust Bowl family and hunger, the humble, faithful gun that fed a generation when everything else had blown away. These 25 weapons weren't about violence. They were about survival, about families who had lost their crops, their savings, and nearly their hope, but refused to lose their table. With wire, wood, rubber, and rusted steel, they fed their children through the hardest decade America ever knew. Which of these did your own family remember? Tell me in the comments. And if this brought that hard, proud history to life, subscribe for more.